I'd like to start the conversation, the next conversation with the question, what are people doing in terms of trying to become retailers? The first step that we found was building a more detailed customer experience by first understanding your customer. And Amy, I'd like to ask you, what's Sabre doing now in order to understand its customers better?
Well, Virgin America has partnered with Sabre on this, the key for us is to start to understand the customer from all aspects and get away from the traditional view of just looking at our loyalty data or just looking at our PNR data. So we are implementing a customer data hub that with Sabre that allows us to bring all those different types of information into one location. It allows us to create a profile and some information about everybody who travels with us. Gets us a little bit away from the focus of just our loyalty members who are very important to us and we want to continue to focus on, but allows us to kind of see a little bit more information about who truly is traveling with Virgin America. So in partnership with Sabre, we're working on implementing that actually right now, and it's going well. Hopefully we'll be live soon from at least a first phase perspective. But the key is going to be integrating all those other data stores that we talked about in the first session into the customer data. The customer data hub. It's not just about kind of the trips with you, it's about the experience that they had, and it's about some of the things we know about our guests because they do contact us on social media or they contact us through the guest relations team or through an email. So bringing all of those things in together is kind of what our focus is, and that's what we've been working on with Sabre.
And some thoughts?
Yeah, I think one needs to look at the challenges with regards to data. There's various degrees of data. So one kind of looks back at data, and one is in that kind of very descriptive space in terms of data. One's looking at hindsight, and these are events of kind of what's happened. And we then need to move into understanding why did this happen at the end of the day, and you're needing to start to diagnose kind of what your problems are, and starting to build a bit more insight. So data is starting to give you that kind of insight. Moving from that point, you want to start to predict. You want to become a little bit more, what will happen at the end of the day. So how do you start to build that insight, and how do you start to take that into a bit more of a foresight kind of environment as to understand that what will happen with customers and what will they want to purchase and what will they want to do. So, and then, there's the kind of nirvana I think we're all kind of heading towards, which is, how can we actually make it happen at the end of the day? So, where do we become a lot more prescriptive with regards to the information that we have, and how can we actually get people engaged and make people make decisions at the end of the day from a retailing perspective? But data's a massive challenge. You deal with massive volume of data, so there's this kind of excess volume of data that exists in the world. One also needs to ensure that there's accuracy and there's quality within the data. There's varying types of data coming in different types of formats these days. There's pictures, there's text, and it's not structured. So one needs to, how do you structure that data? How do you analyze it and structure it and create sentiment around that data? And then there's also this need of kind of at what point you want to start to consume the data. And we're all kind of saying, well, we now need to start to consume this data in a real-time environment, because that's where it becomes really valuable. As things happen with the customer, we need that data to start to talk to us. We can't look at it or get that data after the fact. We need to deal with the issue right now. So it's a massive challenge, and I think if my CEO had said to me, it's a problem you need to solve, I would have packed my box a long time ago. You need to ensure that your partners have that understanding and are looking to build their systems to ensure that we're not just cleaning the data, making sure that there's quality within the data, but that we're actually starting to become a lot more predictive in terms of the types of rules engines we've spoken about, the types of understanding of how do we create that consistency through the organization around discretion, around a number of different elements in terms of what. And then how do we take that insight and how do we retail better? How do we sell better, and how do we take those merchandising products and offer products that the customer actually wants? At the moment, we're very kind of, let's just throw everything in front of the customer, and at the end of the day, we hope they buy, and for some customers, it might not be relevant, and they're going, well, why are you offering me this? To let's ensure that we can, present information or use the information to present product that is essentially what the customer is looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely the next step. I mean, the customer data hub for us is one of a couple pieces that we're implementing that actually, it is about using that data. So, it's the rules engine that builds merchandising. It's the experience manager tool that allows you to have, give experiences to your guests. But what I love to talk to Vineet about is it's also about our frontline teammates, our call center agents, our airport agents, maybe even our in-flight teammates, being actually able to see that information about that guest, about being able to present the master profile to them. So we spend a lot of time talking about that.
And back to Timothy's comment, this is a hard problem to solve.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think when we went down this route a few years ago, we kind of looked at the task, which is you've got customer data that's in your profile system, your PNR system, your ticketing system, your check-in system, your campaign system, your loyalty system, your other servicing system, your web analytics, and you just name it, right? Of course, tapping into social, which is how do you bring all this together, right? So first part is how do you bring this all together? Can you have, we call it a customer master. And then, of course, to Stan's point, all the different personas around it, because Vineet isn't one Vineet, it's Vineet with 5 personas, so to speak. She do that, and then what you want to do is, now let's assume that you have this 360-degree view of every traveler you possibly care about. Then what do you do with it, right? And to Ian's point is, what we're working on now is how do you enrich that data? So you got all this information, all the key attributes, all the habits, moods, behaviors, transactional data is how do you derive intelligence insights out of it? So hence the notion of, okay, I've got all these pieces of data, how do I determine who's more valuable to me as an airline versus not? And then depending on that, what do I do with it? And then the rules engine capability we're talking about in our context is customer experience manager and dynamic retailer, which is how do you take all this data and push it through this entire journey that we're talking about? So regardless of that touch point, you have an opportunity to choose what kind of experience you want to provide, whether it's in a retailing context or a service recovery context, right? I think that's what we're talking about.
But it starts with the creation of that master profile. And I think, where airlines have had access to data in terms of having a loyalty program, and that loyalty program will, understand behaviors for a specific set of customers. The trick is, what about the rest of the customers? Because, some people may well be engaged with your loyalty program. Some people may just be loyal to the loyalty program and not necessarily loyal to you as an airline. So what you need to ensure is how do you get hold of those other customers that aren't signed up, aren't putting their hands up and saying, here I am, track my behavior. So you need to ensure that you're building rules engines that are going to associate different data points. They're going to say, well, I see in these 2 records the cell phone numbers are the same, and the first name might be slightly different, but all the other data is pointing to the fact that these customers exist in one collection. So that becomes very key to create these opaque profiles and then allow the systems to ensure that at the end of the day, you can deal with all of those passengers. Because trust me, the passenger that hasn't signed up, that all of a sudden is experiencing things that a loyalty customer is experiencing, that's showing somebody true value. That's showing somebody recognition. That is saying to somebody, we know you, and we know you in our business. So you need the intelligence and you need the systems like Customer Data Hub to ensure that you create both a known profile and this opaque profile to ensure that you can effectively use that data. And then from that point on, once you have these master profiles, is the knock-on effect in the different systems to ensure, to Amy's point, that there's this consistency at a call center. There's consistency in terms of all the channels that you may use in terms of getting that customer value score to that person to make a decision to ensure that they can act in the most appropriate way.
It ultimately comes down to a dynamic retailing model.
Sure.
So you got to be able to adjust accordingly by market, by time of year, by demographic of the travelers. Certain demographics require a different type of product compared to other demographics, and it really, we work a lot with Sabre too on their dynamic retailing model, and that's the key to satisfying, in my view, on a grand scheme of all the needs of all the customers, because everyone's a little bit different. So you just have to be nimble and be able to manage around different times or different types of requirements depending on status with the airline, destination, time of year, so on and so forth.
And I think what we forget is that it's no longer how we satisfy those needs. This has now become expectations because the
Right.
guys like Amazon,
Threshold.
Amazon are doing it. They're
Yeah.
doing this predictive. They're presenting customers with products that they actually want, and the customers are saying, "Well, how did you know that?" And I think we have to meet these expectations because this is the expectations that customers have. So as an industry, we have to go down this road. It's not an option anymore.
Guests don't want to have to tell you who they are anymore. They want you to to be able to walk up and say, here's your lounge pass because I see that you're a gold member and you're entitled to one, and we've already taken care of your reaccommodation. They want you to know that already. So it's the expectation you have. In order to meet that, really need to have the tools to do that.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that there is a critical part. There's two critical parts to this. The first part is the identification process. How do I ID you specifically and contextually?
That's right.
Right? So the identification process has to be done like that. It can't be, give me your name, give me your, I've got to know who you are now. The other point is that you've got to be a little bit careful not to be overly self-centric. Airlines have got to realize that there is another big wide world out there and people have different experiences and they have different relationships. What is your credit card? What does that mean to you? What does your other relationships do? If I happen to be, Gary and I were talking about Marriott, so if I happen to be a top tier Marriott player and Marriott's not aligned with my airline, how do I deal with that? Because I'm going to try and say, hey, sign up with another airline. What about you? And I'm going, look, don't even offer me this. I've already told you. So I think this understanding of what the other sectors of the experience are, even if I cannot correctly identify you specifically as an individual, I need to be able to identify you as a type and get that type right. I have a very good friend, and he describes how he was tagged, and his tag was actually exposed to him. And his tag was married with 2 children. Well, he's not married, and he definitely won't ever have children. But that's what he was tagged at because of his behavior. So you can mistag people, and that happens today very clearly. So I think it's important that we recognize now that we don't live in this isolated world where the airline, our expectation of what the airline profile is unique. It's not. Look at what Oracle is doing with BlueKai. Look at what Oracle was doing when it bought Micros. Look how many data touch points it actually has, that it has more than anybody else. Because in the United States, Oracle is almost guaranteed to be touching one of us at least once a day. That's a phenomenal piece of information set that we will never get that level. But what customer intelligence can we draw from all of those touch points?
And then how do you build it over time, right? Because what typically happens is the airline starts with
It's
about...
picture and throw it away.
Yeah, it's you have 10, 15, 20% of profiles built into your system, and then over time you want to get information from all the channels. And if you look at what Virgin Australia and the likes are doing, is you're getting into retailing coalitions. So suddenly you have access to consumer data who could potentially be future travelers with you. So how do you kind of go build that information over time? Ultimately, where you want to get to is about 80 or 90%, because after that it becomes that very long tail, and then you look at whether it's worth it. But getting from 15%, knowing 15% of your travel population, to about 80%, that middle 60-65% is the gold mine.
Yeah.
And then you're right, it doesn't happen instantaneously. It kind of happens over time as they travel with you. Every trip they make, you have more information about them. And then as you tap into their moods, their habits, and their experiences outside of the airline, to your point, what they've done, and how do you bring that information in so that you kind of keep augmenting the picture that you have about the travel.
And I think, because we're not just selling our own products, we're selling other products as well. We're selling insurance, we're selling car rental, we're selling hotels. We're retailers of travel as airlines. We have a captive audience. We're the kind of first point in many people's decision-making processes. So your data needs to be flexible because those offers have to remain relevant, not just in terms of the master data storage around your business, but the requirements. If you're selling other products to your customers, you need to be able to get information into that profile, and you're needing to be able to extract that profile. So you've got to build these systems to ensure that there is a flow in terms of third-party data, so that at the end of the day, all the systems that you're selling through, all of the retailing that you're doing is appropriate to the customer.
And I would agree, and going back to what Timothy said about identifying the customer as being key, it's not just that single time once you create that profile, whether it's opaque or not. It's, as you say, Ian, at every single touch point throughout the journey, you have to identify. As someone who flies a lot, and I lost my frequent flyer card on an airline that I hadn't traveled on for a while, and I arrived at the airport, they couldn't identify who I was. I was taking a 16,000-mile journey. They couldn't identify who I was, told me to wait until I reached their hub in another country, to which I inquired 2 or 3 times. Finally, by phone call in a language that I didn't understand, I was able to get to someone who spoke my language, who actually identified me and that my name had been transposed. And I said, great, can you tell me my number so I can insert it in order to get my just rewards, hopefully? And the answer was, no, I can't give it to you. And I said, can you at least insert it? No, I can't do that either. And so, but I will give you a reference number that when you get back to your home country, you can call and they will mail you. And so the fact is, mail, my life depended on mail and a plastic card, right? And so to identification, right, we have to get beyond 20th century capabilities in order to continuously identify the customer.
Oh, try having a name like mine.
Yeah, you definitely have a challenging name.
I have a challenging name. But so you look at all these profiles. So actually, as an extension of this, we actually ran an experiment where we actually created fake identities for a number of people and signed them up for all the different airline systems to see what we would get compared to somebody who was actually a real person who actually flew. The thing with, of course, with airlines is you don't have the frequency of purchase. That lack of frequency of purchase of your product means that you have a decaying expectation, just like you were saying, Stan, that, oh, I can't remember it. You know, I have a spreadsheet that I fill out, and then I shrink it down to a really small thing that fits inside my wallet. But really, I shouldn't have to do this.
That's right.
This ability, we've got the tools. We have the tools now available to us to do this identification, even if it's not specific, as I said before, to knowing it is finite when I'm dealing with this. I want to have an experience that is reliable. I will forego some of the fluffy bits, and I think SurveyMonkey should be removed from every airline's arsenal immediately. Just so we're clear, I don't want to see SurveyMonkey responses to me ever again. Thank you very much. But we should be able to get information without having to go to our customer and saying, please fill out this form. It's only going to take you 3 hours and 22 minutes and 31 seconds to fill out this form. That's insane.
Yeah.
It is totally insane when it comes to the way we should be able to get our information from our customer. You should have, you know, I think airlines are the step beyond politicians when it comes to how people respond to airlines. Because we know that people lie politically. They will not give you their information correctly. And I have a suspicion that the same thing applies to airlines.
Right. Well, and I think CETA put out in their 2015 study, they did a really good job saying that 43% of regular travelers touch an airline with more than one device, and 18 more than 3. And I can tell you, as you know, depending on what your circumstances are, as you're getting ready to pack, get to the airport, whether it's a domestic or international travel, you may have to touch, because you're forced, to touch more than one touch point in order to, for the airline to identify who you are, and you just hope that at the end of it, the automatic visa processing,
yes,
right, or the mismatch between a business class and a first class between partners mapping of your booking doesn't stop that and force you, right, to have to get in line with an agent.
That's an opportune time. Cheryl Barnett sent us a note via Twitter, and the question was, how has the growth of mobile influenced your customer experience strategy? Obviously, it must be top of mind. Would somebody like to explain that, mobile?
Well, I think it goes back to kind of what I said earlier, where the point is to make to give a consistent experience across all of these channels, It shouldn't matter whether they're on their phone or in front of a desktop or calling the contact center. The experience should be relatively similar. I mean, obviously, from a digital perspective, it's going to be a little bit different than actually talking to somebody. But you have a lot more opportunity now. They have their phone in their hand all the time.
Yeah.
You know, this is where you can really start to kind of push the envelope in terms of how you communicate, when you communicate, what you say. You know, push notifications in apps will allow you to do, you know, service recovery and you know, preemptively strike on operational issues, and you can retail better because you know who that person is. I mean, there's so much opportunity out there for mobile.
So they need to have a consistent interface, but at the same time, mobile has moved the needle in itself.
Well, it's certainly made for you know, information to be more widely available and readily available. So there's, you know, I think we talked about earlier the situation where the airport agent doesn't know that the flight's delayed, but the guest does. Of course they do. They have their phone right in front of them, you know, and there's some website that will tell them that their flight has not left the departure city.
Well, in time of disrupt, that's predominantly how we contact our guests, is via
definitely.
SMS or email.
Yeah.
Middle of the night, time of day, we adjust it accordingly by departure time. We don't want to send somebody an email or a text message at 2 in the morning and wake them up if you don't need to, but other times you do. So mobile is where we're trying to drive Virgin Australia as much as possible. Well, 40% of all of our guests check in with their phone or their iPad, scan the code, and away you go. So that's really the wave of the future.
So historically, the data's been inbound, but now with mobile, I mean, it's really increased to an outbound. It's the means of outbound communication.
And it goes back to the point that Amy was making, that mobile is probably one of the main factors why the entire journey is so much more important. Because think about the different touch points with the traveler. You've got essentially two ways: airline initiated and then traveler initiated, right? Mobile is given so much more empowerment, right, that you can actually go interact with the traveler pretty much at every point in the journey, even before you've actually started your trip.
Important for the disruption.
Important for the disruption, post recovery as well. The other important aspect is context. Because, see, if you think about what mobile's done to the consumer industry in general, and again, Gartner talks a lot about this, it's context-aware computing, which is, you know, the context of the consumer, or in our case, the actual
when they are
traveler,
communicating with
where they are, when they are, what's their context, right? So helping airlines understand that context has become so much more important to provide the experience, whether it's retailing, service recovery, or what have you. So the whole journey, and then at least understanding the context of what the traveler
gives you greater flexibility, you know, in terms of mobile, and if you look at the way airports are moving these days, they're shopping malls now. You know, so your customers are all over the place. They're no longer in a holding lounge, and they're all kind of there, and you can go and speak to them. They're everywhere. So it's that whole challenge of how do you speak to them, how do you communicate to them, especially in that kind of delay and disruption. But I think you've also got to be careful is that as you expand all of these channels, and as they become very important, that you don't go down the road of building bespoke tools for every single channel, because then everything that you want to implement at the end of the day becomes a massive challenge for you as an organization. So I think you've got to ensure that you structure your technology right. You know, responsive design is one of the ways of really being able to harness, I think, the benefits of, you know, whatever you're doing in the one platform, it's becoming what is a manifestation on your mobile device, essentially. So, so you really need to consider, you know, what you're doing from a technology perspective, how you build that technology infrastructure, how you almost kind of divorce the core plumbing that of the rules engines and of all of the back-end heavy lifting work in the data that's got to bring itself together, and then how do you position that to a more relevant device in terms of whatever the customer may be
I
using.
think you have to be a little careful with responsive design, because the actual data itself, not just the user experience piece, is relevant. So when I'm leaving home, we used to call it the dead zone, the moment you left your computer until the moment you got back to your computer. That piece used to be known as the dead zone, because there was no way that I, as a traveler, could initiate a dialogue. People couldn't push stuff to me. I had to go somewhere and ask, because the almighty data protector would prevent me from having any dialogue or discussion. Those days are long gone now, because we have this device, and this device is part of our lives. But am I going to expect to be able to make an international booking on my phone as a regular thing? Probably not, because the size of screen does matter. I need to be able to make choice. So would I put the entire bag of tricks, all the spaghetti, onto a screen that is only this size? The answer is no, it's not contextual. But for a Chinese person who has grown up with no access to a large screen device, they've only grown up with access to a small screen device, they're absolutely fine with it. Same for people from India, same thing. But I think we who grew up in sort of semi-sophisticated countries like America, where we're now based, we're used to dealing with the large screen format. And therefore we have this expectation that we can have, and data is cheap and Wi-Fi is readily available. But when it comes to mobile, that piece of how do you make it really contextual at this moment? Because you have the real journey, the one where you're touching and feeling things, and you have that virtual journey that's going on inside the reservation system. What could I learn about that? What can I actually do with that? What's practical? If I miss a gate, a touch point that I should have received? I mean, that's one of the problems you have today with advanced boarding passes. Do we remember when we used to have 60-day advanced boarding passes with pieces of paper? Some of us are old enough to remember this, right? So now, do we get an advanced boarding pass that far out? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
You're lucky if you get it 24. Sometimes you'll get it 48. But I think this is where the nature of the customer experience and the data that supports that customer experience through the different touch points has become so important. But we've got to get it right. We can't just put the whole kitchen sink in there just because somebody in another department says, yeah, I need to have that there.
Well, I have two comments about that. First of all, I agree in the sense that, from an app perspective, that's where you get to do a lot more contextual interfacing with your guest. But we do have a responsive design website that we launched just over a year ago now. And what we have found is, and we kind of went into it with the same expectation that nobody really wants to book a ticket on their phone. That is just too painful. But, I know, right? It's too much information, But honestly, with the responsive design website, what we have found is that people are more and more doing that because we've given them an experience that has enabled them to do that. But I agree with a lot of what you're saying in that, creating an app type of an interface allows you to have more contextual interface between you and the guest versus trying to dump everything into a responsive design website. There's only so much that you can change. You can't change the mobile experience on a responsive design website.
Right.
It is what is on your regular website, right? That's the point of it. So you use the app for the more contextual options.
Yeah, just one other comment, right? There's another aspect around context, which is context persistence.
Yeah.
Which is, and again, if you look at technologies out there today to kind of go enable that, so you can start your research on your phone, but you can actually complete your booking on an iPad, and then actually make the payment on your computer, right? And it actually remembers what the context is. So the tools, the technologies are getting there to kind of enable the behavior that we kind of aspiring to get to.
It's intuitive.
Yeah.
And talking about context and maybe getting back to that master profile, I think what also becomes, and maybe this is a bit of a controversial discussion, but to provide context, you need to score your customer at the end of the day. So what you need to do is
scoring customers. Now the
But
truth
you need
comes
to-
out.
That's gonna get
It's a
crazy.
3-second delay.
Yes.
Anyway, but I think it becomes a very important part of how you deliver the context, because it's not just about what is this customer's value to us, how many
Right.
times do they fly and how frequently, how recent was that interaction. But you also need to contextualize the negative. So you also need to look at, has this customer been denied boarding? Has this customer been delayed? So how do you look at the history of the customer and the history of the customer's experience with you to ensure that at the end of the day you can provide the right context to the customer so that the next time they touch your business, somebody's there to say sorry. Because getting an email and saying, we're very sorry about your last experience, and is one thing, but next time you arrive and you check in, you may well have forgotten, but somebody's there to apologize in person. And somebody says, here's a voucher, go and enjoy our lounge on us and have a great flight. That's putting things into context. So with that customer profile.
But then you have the perfect thing about the different silos, right? Which is, we're really sorry about that last experience that you had that was bad. And here, by the way, is a lounge pass the very next email I received was, this is to tell you that our policy has now changed with regards to our lounge passes, and this is the new policy, and you can't use that particular lounge pass you just got. Thanks very much. Have a nice day.
Well,
But that's what
bad
we're trying to
timing.
solve. Is these things are all linked
think
together
that's it.
now, or we're trying to make them all
That's
linked together.
exactly
You
the
know?
point.
Yeah.
So bringing these things into consideration, I think airlines still tend to think tactically. It has been something that they've always done, and they still do it. And the great example I have of tactical was I got an email from an airline I fly a lot, and the email said, "We know Mondays can be pretty awful, and sitting in a middle seat must be pretty bad. So here's 500 miles for your bad experience." I'm going, you clearly were not paying attention. First of all, 500 miles, and I'm a super duper whoop-de-doo person on this airline? Come on, 500 miles, that's like, psst. But the best thing was, if they'd known, I actually downgraded from first class in order to sit next to a colleague. Oh, so you go, they didn't look at the context of what I did. They would have seen that I did that voluntarily. They didn't even look at the very basics of the information that they had available to them. Never mind the context of who I was, just the basics of that particular thing. Because the marketing department said, let's go hit everybody who's a super duper whoop-de-doo person. I nearly said the airline then. And let's pick everybody who sat in the middle seat on Monday. Great idea. Chaps, let's do this. We're really going to build value against the brand. I don't think so.
But I think that's what.
Don't ever do that again.
No, it wasn't us.
So taking that back, though, I think that when Ian was talking about, right, the ability of the data and we've been, you know, and the contextuality, the real-time nature of the data has to be there to understand that you actually voluntarily downgraded to sit in a middle seat to be next to your colleague. And I mean, there were probably other middle seats available, but for some reason you selected that one. And so the rules engines that sit, so first the data has to be aggregated in real time so that you can actually have an opportunity.
Start with good data.
It has to be good data.
Start with good data.
But to your point about having the real journey that's taking place and the virtual journey that's flowing through right, the information systems at the time, that data has to be aggregated in such a way that you can detect events taking place and have your rules on top of that in order to provide right, that contextuality that was missing in your experience.
This whole aspect of mapping the real person's journey, the real events that are happening with this virtual journey of what I'm expecting, I can have that 360 view forward and backwards, at least 180 each way. But then the real point is something has happened. So imagine it's almost like paranoia. You sit in this spotlight, and in this spotlight, things are occurring around me that I can interact with. It's part of a complex experience. But the only piece that's relevant is now, can I get on board that aircraft right now? Nothing else matters, right? So if that particular piece of the context changes, and you look at the downstream, different events will pop up.
That's right.
If I miss my gate inbound, if the flight is delayed, and I've got another connecting flight, that's stuff we know about. What about the stuff we don't know about? What about the stuff that I would be good to tell my guy, hey, we're going to force you to do an overnight. Do you have a hotel reservation? Can I fix that for you? Those are the sort of things that I think this overall contextual view and this idea of where the real world sits and your electronic digital
And how do you connect the two? Because I think when Ian was talking about the rules engine sits on real-time events that are happening, right? And how do you kind of bring the two together? And that is what I think we're going to talk about in a bit.
I'd like to give the audience, we're talking about a lot of things that we could be doing. I'd like to give the audience a sense of priority. You know, my experience in digital transformation is you need a great big strategy that you're driving to, but the battle is actually won on a series of incremental systematic battles. So let me propose something. Your data is pretty much together, and you've done, you know, it's integrated, you've identified your silos. If you were to think of the customer journey all the way to the end, what are the touch points that you would hit first? Where's the highest return, either an elimination of a negative or the highest return and it's what's positive? What are they? Silence around the table. It must have been a really good question.
That's a great question.
You know, ultimately, going back to understanding what are the moments of misery, what are the moments, you know, of success to the customer. become a very important part of that. I think the clear thing and the unfortunate part is that all these systems live in an ecosystem together.
Yeah.
So the full benefits of using this customer data, having a rules engines like Customer Experience Manager, having the infrastructure and plumbing of Customer Data Hub, building your customer value scores, having the context at the end of the day to apply this across all your channels, it does require you to kind of put all these pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a silver bullet in what, but you've got to start. You've got to get going. You've got to have a plan.
Yeah.
You've got to implement. With our implementation of Customer Experience Manager, we're kind of starting off with a lot of small little things, little customer interventions, just saying thank you. Just say thank you for flying with us. But we need an if-when situation that when the flight peaks, then we need to action, and then we need to send the customer an SMS, and we need to say thank you. But don't go and say thank you when the flight's delayed and the customer's grumpy, and then you say you're sorry. So, there's a lot of those types of things that need to be done, but you've got to start. You've got to get on that road, and you've got to look at a plan. And it's not just about customer experience. There's a huge revenue opportunity in this. There's a huge ability to move from those more, and whatever your merchandising strategy, be it a la carte, be it branded fares, be it, more of a kind of a bundled environment from an ancillaries perspective, but starting to use that data where you're actually starting to dynamically build product that the customer is looking for at the end of the day. And price it them, because you might want to say to your high value customer, you know what, the bag's not as important because we know from a value perspective, you're buying full tickets anyway because you're wanting the flexibility. So you know what, we can afford to throw in the bag. Customer might not use the bag, but he sees that as a benefit. So it becomes very important.
I think, that's exactly, bringing it to the retailing side, because we spent a lot of time talking about the experience side, which is very, very important. But, it is about offering the guest a value-added product when they want it, from the touch point they want, to use, giving them what they want when they want it, giving them an opportunity to choose the things that really are important to them, and using the data to understand that these are the things that they do want to see. You don't give them the lounge pass when they're a lounge subscriber. You don't give them a bag when they're traveling on a overnight for business. You offer them products that, based on what you know about them, they actually might use. Right. You like my bag example?
Excuse me, Timothy, it feels you might have something to tell the group here.
What I
Share it with the group.
Is it goes back to the silo thing. So the guy who's responsible for the overall frame and design of the website, he's been told, merchandise sell up, sell premium economy every single possible damn moment you possibly can, right? So you get the display that says, congratulations, you've automatically been allowed to get your upgrade. And then on the same screen it says, buy the upgrade.
See, that's what we're getting away from. That's the point.
Yes, but here is where I think it's not just a question of how you approach the data. I think it really goes to Ian's point, is you have to have a mentality behind this. You must have a strategy. I know one airline who went all the way back and actually took a whole wall and actually mapped the entire customer journey on a wall. And that customer journey has something like 200 points. And then the connection between those 200 points was to show what could have a possible impact. And that was just one use case scenario. And so they did this physically on a wall over a weekend. The teams just got in there and they were on step ladders, and they were doing all these different things. And I think that's something that we've taken for granted, so many things that we do in the airline world. And some of those things, you need to start challenging the basis of why those things exist. For example, airline systems were originally built on telex, one-way messaging. So the idea of fire and forget and I'll deal with the exception is so core to how the systems operate today. But every customer now experiences that every transaction is expecting to get a response back. So the whole notion of how the underlying architecture from the IT perspective is in fact built. And whether you've got a faster machine underneath that's underpinning it or a slower machine is irrelevant if it's still thinking that it's sending a one-way message. Because our expectation from our customer is, guess what? If I tell you something, I don't want to have to tell you again 93 times as I go through my journey. Why do I have to repeat, my name is? Yeah? And by the way, spell it right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of finish up with the topic of merchandising. The business has obviously been one of, it's been challenged by the commoditizing to a certain extent. All of a sudden there's opportunities being created around merchandising, which are great as new opportunities, but obviously present a whole new layer of complexity in terms of working with data and working with customers. Any people have any comments on how they in turn are handling the challenge and the opportunity of merchandising in airlines?
So I think merchandising is when one looks at seats and when one looks at pricing and when one looks at the sophistication of the systems that have been built around yield managing the seats and getting the best that you possibly can out of them. I think when we're now looking in the world of ancillaries, we still have a long way to go in terms of how we ensure that we can.
Maybe you could define ancillaries for just a.
Where we talk about a merchandising strategy, you may well break down a lot of your services. You may well have bag fees. You may well have seating to ensure that at the end of the day, customers can have a bit more of a selection and ultimately create their own kind of personalization in terms of the shopping process. So one can have this full a la carte menu. One can then start to look at saying, well, do we bundle certain of these ancillaries together, and do we offer bundles where we maybe discount something that might not be appropriate, but it looks like it's got value, or we offer customers essentially buy-up opportunities in terms of those. One looks at the branded fares environment where one may take some of those ancillaries and start to put it into actual fare buckets and ensure that at the end of the day you can move it forward, or one then moves into that kind of dynamic retailing. But I think where the big opportunity is for merchandising is to start to ensure, and especially from a revenue perspective, is really start to understand the selling behaviors around them, so clean data structures, clean decision information.